I'm one of the moderators of the large shamanism group on Facebook. It's a big group. There's over 80,000 members in it. And one of the things that is constantly talked about is meditation. Um, and it seems to me that a lot of people are very confused as to A, what meditation is, and B, they confuse shamanism with meditation. So I thought it would be really good to talk a little bit about what they each of these two things are, and spell out the differences. So the first thing I want to say is that shamans, as a rule of thumb, don't meditate. Now, meditation is stilling the mind. It is not focusing on your thoughts. To use a lovely Tibetan way of explaining it, there are lots of clouds up there, and in meditation we simply don't attach our mind to the clouds, the clouds being thoughts. So it's like we sit, we allow the clouds to roll past. We don't kind of grab hold of them and follow them, because that's what our mind does. All the time our mind is thinking about what the next thing is that we're going to say, and oh, what's that over there? Oh, wow. Oh, crikey, look at that out the window. Oh, okay. So, oh no, where was I? I was saying something or other. That reminds me of a story I heard many years ago, and you get the gist, yeah? So meditation is cutting all that crap out, and it's just simply not grabbing hold of those thoughts. It's like a thought occurs like a cloud, and I don't pay any attention to it, and the cloud wanders away by itself. And then maybe, I mean, you have good days and bad days with meditation. Any of you who meditate will know that. And so sometimes you notice the cloud, and then you notice that you're noticing the cloud, and so you stop noticing the cloud, and the cloud wanders away again. So it's about not following your thoughts. It's about stilling the mind. Seems to me like a lot of people that I talk to about meditation, it's much more like active daydreaming. They're not stilling the mind at all. They're kind of off in their heads with fantasy stuff and, following the fairies and following the whatever it is they are following. None of that, however, is shamanism. In shamanism, you go into a trance state, very often by drumming, and by calling the spirits, and the spirits come into you, and with those spirits inside you, you go out and you visit their lands, or you sort of stay within yourself and they talk to you. It's very different to meditation. Very, very different to meditation. Now, the Hana method, the modern Western way of teaching, core shamanism as it's generally called, is that you have a drum beat generally, and you imagine in your mind's eye that you're going to a place in nature that you know, with an entrance into the earth. Generally, this is the way it's done, especially journeying to the lower world. So you maybe go to a cave or whatever it is that you know, somewhere that you know, and you kind of imagine yourself going down into a tunnel, and at the bottom of the tunnel you are in the lower world, and you meet spirit animals or whatever. In essence, that is a distilled form of shamanism, and I'm not knocking it, because I think it's a really good way for people in the West to actually get to grips with it. I don't necessarily think it's the best way, but it's probably the best way that we have, because most people are not going to meet shamans in their everyday world. We're not part of a culture that actually has shamanism in it. So you're not likely to meet a traditional shaman and become an apprentice and all of those bits and pieces. So the spirits need a way to get people to kind of work with them, and I think core shamanism is an excellent way. I think it can also be a bit of a trap, because it's very mechanistic, and I also think what's happening is that the further it gets away from its origin with Hana and the people around him, the more new age it gets. So it gets kind of polluted by lots of other things. So it's become very fluffy in times, very, very fluffy. Some shamanic teachings are really, they're not very shamanic at all. And it's very fluffy indeed, which is a shame. But I think if you're disciplined with it and you have a good core shamanic teacher, it's an excellent way of doing it. Now, trance is a very common, very human thing. We go into trance on a regular basis. Everybody goes into trance. You will have experienced walking down a street or driving down a street and not really being aware of your situation because you've been lost in thought. That's a trance state. It's generally said that when you get into an elevator and there are other people in there and you don't want to make eye contact, or you're sitting on a bus or a train and there's people around, you go internal. A trance is just an internal state. And there's nothing mysterious about it because it happens all the time. As a kid, you would have daydreamed when the lessons were boring, and maybe you gazed out of the window, or you stared at a book on the bookshelf by the side of the teacher's head, or whatever it was. You were fixated on something and you were lost in your own thoughts. You were internal. That's a trance. In a spirit-based trance, it's a little bit different. But in essence, it's the same thing, and something happens on a neurological level which can be measured. So everybody experiences trance, and all kind of indigenous cultures, well, I guess probably all cultures really, experience trance in a spiritual way, in an ecstatic way. It's part and parcel of evangelical Christianity. It's part and parcel of any mystical tradition. And it's certainly part and parcel of any indigenous culture. And lots of these cultures will seek out trance. For instance, the Humbalentia. The Humbalentia is the vision quest. That's the Lakota word for it. Crying for a vision. And the person on the vision quest will go up the hill, as it's called, and they will stay there for a period of time, and they will pray and they will fast, and they will kind of really try and put themselves into an altered state. And if the spirits are blessing them, they will have a vision, which is why it's the vision quest. They are crying for a vision. So they have a vision and they will be in a trance state. But that is very different to a shamanic state, because a shaman, one of the other prerequisites of shamanism is that it's a repeatable condition. They can put themselves into a trance repeatedly, and they can do it because they have a technique to do it, which kind of works. A vision quest may or may not produce a vision because it involves the participant hoping and praying and putting themselves into a stressful situation that may induce one, but it may not arrive. The same thing happens in a lot of the African traditions and the kind of Afro-Caribbean traditions, such as voodoo and things like that. You will very often people will go to the ceremonies, members of the congregation, for want of a better way of putting it, and if they are smiled upon by the spirits will come into them, but they don't know that that's going to happen to them. They hope that it might, and it may happen to some people more than it happens to others, but they can't plan for it. A shaman puts on his sacred togs, his sacred clothes, does his ceremonies, his preliminary ceremonies to kind of put him into that space. He's a professional at it. He's a professional trance person. So he then, or she, repeatedly goes into trance. They can do it at any particular point. Occasionally the spirits will say, no, not today. That happens. And there's generally a very good reason for that. But in essence, a shaman can do it at the drop of a hat and go into trance, and they can do it repeatedly, and that's why I say they're professionals at it. And that doesn't occur in every culture. It really is just in those shamanic cultures, like I talked about in the first part of these talks, where it's it's sort of Asia and Siberia and places like that. I also wanted to just say something I forgot to mention. We talk about shamanism because the early explorers from Russia met male shamans and thought that the men were the only ones worth talking to, and so that's why the word shaman has come into the Western language. I often think that if they had been a little bit more enlightened and had talked to the women, we would now be talking about Udiganism rather than shamanism. Oh, and another thing around that is that another word that's become quite popular is shamanka. Shamanka, a lot of people talk about shamanka being a female shaman. Ka is a Russian suffix on the end of a word. It's just that putting the female ending actually diminishes it a little bit. So it's not good. I would try and avoid using the word shamanka because it's not accurate, and B, it's a kind of sweet little thing. It's a little bit patronizing actually. It's diminishing. It's because that's what we do as a patriarchal culture. So a shaman is somebody who goes into trance. They don't practice meditation. They go into trance because they're capable of doing it on a regular basis. The other thing I think that's important to say is that a shaman is chosen by the spirits. There's a lovely Evenk story. Again, if you remember the Evenk, where the word shaman comes from. The Evenk teaching story, metaphor, way of saying it is that before we're born, we all our souls sit like birds on the huge world tree, which is at the centre of the worlds. And we all of us sit on branches of this tree waiting to get born. And the Evenks say that the souls of ordinary people sit on one branch and the souls of shamans sit on another branch. They are separate. They're not better. It's not like shamans are further up the tree or humans are further up the tree or whatever. Yeah, they're not better, but they are different. And so you are born a shaman. You are born with that potential. And you may or may not have the karma to actualize that. You may be very close to the spirits, but you may not have the ability to listen to them very well and be taught, or you may not meet a human teacher who will teach you how to be with the spirits. And so they say that not everybody can become a shaman, but the shaman seed is in those people chosen. If you don't activate the seed, if you don't grow the seed because of your karma, you are generally said to have an unhappy life, and probably a short life, because you're kind of neither fish nor fowl. You're stuck between the worlds, stuck between the ability and the seed of actualizing it. I didn't say that very well, but you know what I'm saying. There's a Mongolian word for that. They talk about people as being, I forget the word, but the word means chrysalis, like a butterfly chrysalis. It's people who are stuck in that chrysalis state. They never emerge as butterflies, and so they have a half-life. So it's a tough one. There's also another whole thing I see in the West around people equating shamanism with mental health and mental illness. That is a bit of a legacy from the late 19th century, early 20th century, where there was a big theory that shamanism was, basically shamans were schizophrenics. That is an illusion too. That's not accurate. It's most people who have mental health issues have mental health issues. They're not shamans, and they don't necessarily have the shamanic seed. They weren't born as a shaman or a potential shaman. That's not always the case, but it is generally the case. There's a bit of kind of glamour, I think, put out around mental health. People kind of think that it's, or can think that it's a sign that they're kind of going to be a shaman. It makes people feel a bit better about the illness they're suffering. I don't know, but it's not actually necessarily true at all. It's generally not true. So in the next part, we'll talk about some other bits and pieces, and I hope you stick with it and come back and listen to that one. Thank you.